Hi guys, and welcome back to the podcast. This week we're going to talk about BMI and its application in sport. I'm going to ask you a question.
What does BMI stand for, is what you're going to ask?
No.
No? Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, it was.
Was it?
Yeah, go on.
Body mass index.
Very good, very
I
good.
think that's...
And how do you work out, what is it?
Right.
Go on, what is body mass index? Not what does it stand for, but...
Yeah.
Because there's going to be a lot of people out there that have heard of it or know the abbreviation, don't know what it stands for.
I can't remember the equation now.
So it's your weight.
Weight, height, what is it, body fat percentage? No.
No, it's literally just your weight and your height.
Is it
That's
just that?
why it's so...
A shit metric.
Yeah, that's why it's a rubbish metric. So it's essentially your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared. So, in short, you do, let's say someone is 80 kilos. So they would have 80 kilos, and let's say they are 5'10" of these, because I know that what that is in meters. And that will be divided by 1.76 to the power of 2, and that will give you a number. That number will probably be about around 25. There's different categories for BMI. Do you know what they are?
Are they just morbidly obese, overweight, average,
Healthy.
healthy,
Yeah.
underweight?
That's it.
That's
Nailed it. Nailed the test, yeah.
There's no more?
Well, there's like lots of different categories of obese.
Yeah.
So once you get a BMI of over 30, you then are classified as obese, and there's lots of different classifications of obesity. So you've got, they don't typically call them morbidly obese and things like that anymore.
Change it to something that's
it's like,
correct.
yes, more PC. It's like category 1, category 2 and category 3. So let's start with obesity, work our way down. Obesity, you've got category 1, which is like the lower form of BMI, and that's when your BMI is between 30 and 35. Cat 2 is between 35 and 40, and then anything over 40 is Cat 3, which I think is what most people would call morbidly obese. You've then got the overweight section, the overweight category, and that's anything over 25 up to 30. And then you've got the healthy range, which is typically 18.5 to 25, and then anything under 18.5 is considered underweight. The reason why we said it's a shite metric is because its application in sport isn't the best. So it's a very good metric for like the general population, because the general population aren't going to the gym frequently and trying to gain muscle mass. They're not exercising as much as they should be, and therefore laying down the foundations for good muscle growth. So obviously this podcast is for athletes, and most athletes tend to have a higher muscle mass and mostly a lower body fat percentage than the average person, which is why your weight, as we all know, muscle weighs more than fat in terms of, if you look at the size of it, you know, it doesn't weigh more, because if you weighed the same amount, you've got the same amount. But if you had 100 grams of muscle, you know, 100 grams of fat, you would have
A larger size of fat.
yeah,
Muscle.
absolutely. God, my mind went blank then. I was
Yeah.
like, whoa,
Twisting it for you.
too much for a Friday evening.
Yeah.
And that's why those with a large muscle mass, which you could see visually, will tend to have a higher BMI than someone who has a lower amount of muscle mass. And obviously, if you're categorizing just using BMI, it might say they're overweight or obese. I know myself I'm technically in the overweight category. I'm about 28 on the BMI scale. What are you? Do you know?
I have no idea, but I'm definitely...
You'd be in the overweight, I think. I think you'd
Overweight,
probably be about the same as me. Because you're taller, but you weigh more.
I'm 5'11" and 9/10. And
Just shy of 6 foot.
yeah, I'm not sorry about it, I promise. And normally about 93 kilograms. So
93. Yeah.
how good's your maths?
Not that good, I'm afraid.
Mm.
But yeah, most athletes will be a higher. I say most athletes. Most athletes that play rugby will have a higher BMI than an average population. Obviously, if you're an athlete and you do sort of long distance or more aerobic fitness, like marathon training or triathlons, you will probably still have a healthy BMI. You may even, some people do fall into the lower side of a healthy BMI, just because we've spoken previously about the different types of muscle fibre, and you've got type 1 and type 2. Type 2 is the fast twitch muscle fibres, which have a big cross-sectional area, and that's why they look big on bodybuilders, don't they? And if you look at a sprinter, they've got big legs, big arms. That's because they've got a large amount of type 2 muscle fibres, whereas and that's for the short-term anaerobic sort of fitness, the short bouts of repeated exercise. And then you've got the longer the aerobic exercise, which is mainly type 1, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
right.
exactly.
I know there's like type 3 and stuff like that, isn't there? But
is there? Oh, you got type 2 and type 2B.
That's it, sorry, yeah. But the type 1 tends to be more slender, more good at circulating oxygen for obviously the aerobic exercise side of things, and that's why long distance runners tend to have a large amount of muscle compared to fat, because they burn the fat, but actually the muscle size isn't that big, and that's why their BMI tends to be a little bit lower. But although it's a shite metric, it is quite, I don't know, I want to say it's useful still.
I think I've used it fairly recently on younger athletes, like specifically rugby players, in children.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, because it's obviously more skewed because they're kids and they're going to have slightly different proportions. However, the reason why we'd use it is so we can kind of get an idea for what position they could be when they're older.
Right.
So obviously those with a higher body fat percentage, we can start looking at front row positioning or whatever.
Is this in your rugby coaching?
At RGC we used to. Obviously I've left there now, but yeah, we use that as a metric, just as a blanket testing, because it's an easy one to work out. It also gives us a better idea about their metrics as they're growing, so we can compare their BMI from one age group and then through the others.
Because BMI shouldn't be used for anyone under the age of 18.
No, but it's the reason we obviously know that it's going to be skewed.
Yeah.
Because
use growth charts, because going a bit off topic, because
growth
growth charts are used for paediatrics, for children. So
yeah, I didn't use that data very much, to be honest. I collected it and that's about it. And then we sent it off to the Welsh Union. So
yeah,
it's one of them. We used it. I don't necessarily think it's. Well, I agree with you. I think it's a bit of a rubbish metric in sport, especially obviously for younger athletes. But they seem to want that data.
I think from a baseline, it's quite useful. If you've got someone, let's say, that is just starting out, it's good to see where you are. If in terms of, let's say you've never been to the gym before, you want to start playing rugby or you want to start playing any sort of sport, it's good to know, is your BMI in a healthy range? And if it's not, you sort of get to know what weight you need to be a healthy weight. But at the same time, like I said, if you've got more muscle mass, you will be a higher BMI, and it's about using the two together. I know what my BMI is, but I equally know my body fat percentage is not high, and therefore I know it's muscle mass rather than fat mass. But there are going to be also those sports where a higher BMI is more beneficial. We're talking, like you said, front row for rugby. There'll be those positions in American football where they are, is it linebackers? where they are literally just wrestling someone to make sure that no one's coming through their channel.
You got like shot putters and sumo wrestlers and
absolutely even Olympic lifters. When you get to that category, which is I think the open category, isn't it? It's like when you're over a certain weight, even having a higher BMI, and we're not talking muscle mass. Strongmen, for example, they're not all lean, and there's a correlation between BMI and strength in that sort of category, in that strength training category, not just the average Joe compared to a strength trainer. But if, let's say, Eddie Hall was lean compared to what his weight would be when he's not worried about how lean he is, his strength would be far greater when he's not worried about how lean he is. So in terms of BMI, his BMI is going to be way higher. Yes, you could categorize him as overweight or obese in terms of the body fat percentage as well, because you'd be looking at things like your waist circumference and things like that to determine his risk of disease. But in terms of strength, having the larger BMI is definitely going to help. So I think it's good to be aware of these things, but you've always got to take them with a pinch of salt. And obviously with this podcast, we're just educating, or trying to anyway.
Yeah, it's probably a useful thing for people to know who potentially have been using BMI as a metric because they've gone through a big weight loss journey and then want to go into rugby, hypothetically, that they should be aware that BMI in terms of rugby is kind of
null and void.
So it's just something to consider, I guess.
I think anything you've got to. It's what context you use it in. So BMI independently is crap, but if you're looking at it from a point of view where you're looking at sort of muscle measurements, you're looking at body fat percentages in accordance with that BMI as well, then it gives you a larger picture of what's going on. And that's when it's really useful. I also quite like the idea of this podcast of maybe some youngsters listening to this, those sort of 16 to 18 year olds that are coming through that want to know more about this stuff. I know at that age I was obsessed with my BMI and weight and what I should be, etc. I think from a performance point of view, if you're playing something like a contact sport, let's say, where it's Gaelic football, rugby, American football, having a higher BMI because you're gaining muscle will have its benefits. But then also if you're carrying a large amount of body fat, that will also hinder your performance because you are carrying more weight with the same amount of muscle. So it's like your strength to weight ratio, which we talked about previously, haven't we?
Yeah.
So if you are that sort of age and trying to come through the ranks, yes, it's important to gain muscle and eat so you are gaining muscle to become more strong and powerful. But therefore, if you're eating too many calories and you're gaining weight at an excessive rate, and the fact that you're putting down fat, just bear in mind that will hinder your performance as well, because you're gaining the fat, which you've also got to run with, which will, ruin your fitness and things like that. So, do you have any little nuggets before we close out?
I think so.
No?
BMI is pretty simple, really, isn't it?
It is. It is. Not everyone knows what it is, though. I sometimes think that everyone's heard of it, no one really understands it and where it should be useful, whereas you and I sort of deal with this sort of stuff every day. And it's quite easy to forget that once upon a time we didn't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, hope it's been useful. We'll catch you next week. Take care.